take it this far. Now I'm in the limelight cause I rhyme tight. Time to get paid, blow up like the world trade. Born sinner, the opposite of a winner. Remember when I used to eat sardines for dinner? Peace to Ron G, Brucey B, Kid Capri. Funk Master Flex, Love Bug Star.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the Black Caps want priority access to the COVID vaccine. While they certainly got the ear of Sports Minister Grant Robertson and Dr Ashley Bloomfield, lobbying them at Sunday's game where the pair was invited and hosted by New Zealand Cricket. So what commitments did the DG of Health give, and is it over the boundary or not? Checkpoint goes searching for a citizen's second 11 who's happy to let the team jump ahead in the immunisation queue, and a sharp jab from the nurses' organisation. The union won't rule out strike action during the vaccine rollout. And the largest super yacht expected here for the America's Cup hits an immigration storm. Don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook Live.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Layata tēnei. The country's first large-scale COVID-19 vaccination clinic has opened in South Auckland today. It coincides with the official start of vaccinations for the 50,000 household contacts of border and MIQ workers. Jordan Bond reports.
The East Tamaki Clinic will be one of 3 large-scale centres in Auckland where the public will be vaccinated from mid-year. From today, about 10 vaccinators will inoculate about 150 people a day, but the Ministry of Health says that number will quickly increase. There will also be some smaller vaccination centres in South Auckland in partnership with some Māori and Pacific organisations. After border and MIQ workers' families, about 55,000 frontline health workers are next in the queue. This is Jordan Bond.
The Black Caps cricket coach hopes players and staff are vaccinated for COVID-19 before touring overseas, but says the squad will travel regardless. It's been revealed the Director-General of Health was lobbied by New Zealand cricket bosses for priority access to the COVID vaccine for its players. The team will still tour to England this year, even if the request is unsuccessful. But coach Gary Stead hopes they can be vaccinated before leaving.
I think people will want to be vaccinated. Yes, I think that's a natural thing when there's a pandemic like this going on around the world. But that ultimately isn't our decision. I mean, that's something that the government will make.
The Black Caps coach Gary Stead. The independent inquiry into the police practice of photographing innocent young people is being widened. The inquiry was launched after RNZ alerted police to many cases of young Māori being photographed on Wairarapa streets, and it will now include any member of the public. Te Aniwa Hurihanganui reports.
RNZ has spoken to 7 Māori whānau who claim children were stopped and photographed by police, but it's also happened to adults. A Māori woman in Auckland says she and her friends were photographed by an officer after being pulled over for speeding. The joint inquiry by the Independent Police Conduct Authority and the Privacy Commissioner will now include anyone who's been photographed by police in a public space. Ko te aniwa, Hurihanganui, aho.
A senior government minister says if terror suspect Suhaira Aden is returned to New Zealand, she'd be free to live in the community with restrictions. It looks increasingly likely the 25-year-old and her 2 children will end up here. They're being held in a deportation centre in Turkey after trying to illegally cross the border from Syria. New Zealanders have been assured national security would be a high priority, but Andrew Little confirms there are no laws in place that would allow her to be detained on arrival.
Free subject to conditions. It is, I think, the right balance in a democracy like ours when you've got somebody who has citizenship who otherwise would have a right to free movement, but who is assessed as posing a risk.
Andrew Little says a High Court judge makes the call about imposing a control order, which can impose restrictions but cannot detain someone at the border. The government is spending $1 million a day on transitional and emergency housing, such as motels and boarding hostels. $82.5 million was spent on emergency housing grants during the last quarter, averaging more than $900,000 a day. Another $155,000 was spent on motels for transitional housing. When questioned about this by National during Parliament's question time, Housing Minister Megan Woods defended the government's track record on homelessness.
What we are is a party and a government that is committed to finally owning up to the fact we have a homelessness problem in this country, that we have a housing crisis, and that we are putting the actions into place.
Megan Woods says motels aren't ideal, but she would rather that than people sleeping in cars or on the street. The owners of the largest super yacht planning to visit Auckland for the America's Cup say they've been denied entry because of the size of its crew. The 85-metre-long pleasure craft, Bold, is anchored at Fiji with more than 20 crew on board, including the vessel's owner. Captain Todd Leach says Immigration New Zealand considers its crew too big of a bubble and it would have to let go 1/3 of its staff to enter the country, which they don't want to do. The super yacht now plans to head to Australia, and Mr Leach says New Zealand companies will now miss out on a reported $750,000 of booked refit work. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. The Black Caps coach Gary Stead fully expects captain Kane Williamson to play in cricket's World Test Championship final. The world's top-ranked Test batsman has been ruled out of the upcoming 3-match one-day series against Bangladesh here in New Zealand to rest an elbow injury. The Black Caps are scheduled to play the World Test Championship final in mid-June, and Stead is confident the injury won't force Williamson to miss the match against India.
I don't expect that to happen at all. I think Kane could still keep playing right now, but it's just getting it completely right, I guess, will give him peace of mind in the long run. So I have no doubts that Kane will be okay for playing for New Zealand moving forward, and hopefully in nearer future than further away.
Gary Stead. The Team New Zealand helmsman Peter Burling says boat speed will be the difference between winning or losing the America's Cup against Luna Rossa. Racing in the best of 13 series starts tomorrow on the Waitemata Harbour. After months of secrecy about how each boat will line up, Burling is eager to see what the Italians will put on the water.
The great unknown right now is how that is going to shape up. We're really happy with how our boat's going, but until we actually get to race that first race, we don't know for 100%.
Peter Burling. The New Zealand tennis player Marcus Daniel and his Austrian partner Philippe Oswald have beaten Australian Open doubles champions Ivan Dodig and Philippe Polasek in the first round of the ATP 250 tournament in Doha. That's the news.
Police action is questioned.
We record interactions with people every day, and that should be colourblind.
Royals put on notice.
And I'm sure their PR teams are working to figure out exactly the best way to tackle this, because they can't let this be. The normal rule mantra is never complain, never explain. That won't wash this time.
And truck safety an issue.
Investigators subsequently found 37 such trailers around the country with these welding defects.
Holding people to account. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow evening south of Auckland. For Gisborne through to Wairarapa, mainly fine. Isolated showers in Gisborne tonight and scattered rain in Wairarapa tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine tonight, mostly cloudy tomorrow. Isolated showers turning to rain for a time. Marlborough and Nelson, a period of rain tomorrow, otherwise fine weather. Bulla to Fiordland, isolated showers turning to rain south of the glaciers tonight, then spreading north tomorrow with heavy falls. Easing to isolated showers from afternoon and clearing in Fiordland. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloud increasing with patchy rain for Southland and Otago tonight. Rain becoming widespread tomorrow morning, then easing to a few showers about Southland and Otago by the afternoon. Chatham Islands, occasional showers. RNZ National. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's been revealed the DG of Health was lobbied by cricket bosses for priority access to the COVID vaccine. We'll have more on that later, but first this evening, the largest super yacht destined for New Zealand in time for the America's Cup has had its bubble burst, with immigration saying there's too many crew on board, scuppering up to $1 million of business for the marine industry. The 85-metre long pleasure craft Bold is anchored at Fiji with more than 20 crew on board, including the vessel's super-rich owner. The yacht has the paperwork to enter New Zealand waters, but without visas for all its crew, it will bypass New Zealand and hundreds of thousands of dollars of refit business will sail away too. Our reporter Amy Williams told me what she's found out.
Bold super yacht is anchored off the coast of Fiji at port there, and it's waiting to hear if its crew can come into New Zealand. The ship itself has been given Ministry of Health approval to come, and then after that clearance, the ship can apply for its crew to come to New Zealand. Now, if one of those crew members doesn't get approval, then the ship can decide whether it comes to New Zealand without that person, and so that's where it's at. So basically, through the ministry's $50,000 refit rule, that means vessels can come here if they're coming for refit work. So that's the rule that the ship is coming here under.
So there is 23 crew and the owner's family on board. How many of them have been denied visas, do we know?
We do know that a third of them have been denied visas. The ship captain, who I spoke to earlier, said that that's because they're not considered critical workers. However, on a ship that large, he said they're all critical workers. There's 23 of them. There's not that many. It's 85 metres long. It's a massive ship. But he was understanding of the government's rules at the same time.
Okay. Shall we have a listen to what he had to say? Okay, so that's Bold's captain, Todd Leach. What options are they left with now?
Well, the captain told me that their options are basically to get rid of a third of their crew. But they're not interested in doing that. He said these crew have become friends, family even, over the course of the 2 years that they've been on board together. He said they live together, it's their home. And so he said it's actually not an option for them to get rid of staff. And so in that respect, they cannot comply with the rules that the government is asking them to comply with. And he said that they basically live in a super yacht bubble. So there's about 4 or 5 Kiwis on board and the same number of Australians, and he said that they were looking forward to putting their feet on home soil.
So does this mean that New Zealand is going to miss out on an almost $1 million worth of work on a single yacht?
Well, it could mean that if they bypass New Zealand, which it looks like is going to happen, then this one super yacht would have spent it's been reported at $750,000, close to $1 million. So this super yacht has been anchored at ports in the Asia Pacific region for a while now, waiting to come to New Zealand, waiting for that final clearance, and it hasn't got it. Captain Todd also told me that they are looking to go to Australia. He said it's the other logical place to go, the next place after New Zealand that you would go to get refit work done. And he said that they'll be making that decision as to whether they go there in the next week or so. But he said that it seemed that New Zealand Immigration had basically made the decision for them.
So have we had any response from immigration?
I did approach Immigration New Zealand and for comment and for information about the background to this particular super yachts case, and they said that they would respond to me, but they could not provide that response in time.
And that was reporter Amy Williams there talking about the super yacht bowl that's in Fiji. It can't get visas for all the crew on board, but was hoping to come here for around 750,000 plus refit of the yacht. It's been revealed the Director General of Health was lobbied by cricket bosses for priority access to the COVID vaccine for its players, all while Dr Bloomfield was an invited guest hosted by New Zealand Cricket at Sunday's match in Wellington. The NZC also had the ear of Sports Minister Grant Robertson, who they were hosting too. New Zealand Cricket wants the Black Caps vaccinated ahead of their trip to England in June, sparking debate about who should get priority ahead of the government unveiling its vaccination rankings tomorrow. Ashley Bloomfield says he was at the cricket in a private capacity, but gave a commitment to New Zealand Cricket to look into the issue. Chen Yu reports.
8 Black Caps players are leaving the country soon for the Indian Premier League competition in early April. Hot on the heels of that, the Black Caps also have matches scheduled in England in June. 2 test matches against England and the final of the World Test Championship against India. Today's being revealed, Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield was hosted at the Black Caps' most recent match against Australia. There he spoke to New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive David White and said he would consider the matter of players being vaccinated before travelling overseas. The Sports Minister, Grant Robertson, was there too.
The Director General of Health is entitled to attend the cricket, and you can imagine that all sports organisations, not just New Zealand Cricket, are anxious to find out whether or not it's going to be possible for people who have to travel overseas to be vaccinated.
Black Caps coach Gary Stead says they are hopeful the players and staff will be able to be vaccinated before heading overseas.
I think people will want to be vaccinated. Yes, I think that's a natural thing when there's a pandemic like this going on around the world. But that ultimately isn't our decision. I mean, that's something that the government will make.
Mr. Stead expects the Indian Premier League will likely vaccinate the 8 New Zealand players involved in the competition. But as for the rest of the team, due to travel directly to England, should they get priority access? Some New Zealanders think there are people who need the jabs more.
Well, I'm thinking that prioritizing the essential workers like the police departments and firefighters, and especially the people that are like working in an emergency ambulance.
I think it's more important to protect our communities here first. Like people who work even through level 3, like at the grocery stores and like supermarkets and I guess like bus drivers.
There are also some like Tammei Sharma who think sports people's livelihoods and careers are important.
There is a higher risk for those sports individuals who are going off-site and going offshore and playing sports and representing the country. Even if it's a private affair, their life is not going to stop as well, right?
The Sports Minister, Grant Robertson, says the government is trying to strike a balance between supporting economic activity alongside taking the best health advice. He says a lot of sports are interested in whether those who have to travel overseas for competitions can get vaccinated.
So I've had a number of different conversations as the Minister of Sport and Recreation. The government's working its way through how we could do that, but not just for sports people either. There are other people who have to travel for particular reasons overseas.
But the COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, says the decision on the sequencing of vaccination will not be influenced by lobbying. He says the focus now is on the frontline workforce, and the new framework will reveal more details on who will be prioritised next.
We will set out a very clear framework and a very clear rationale for who's in each group and why they are in that group.
National Party's COVID-19 response spokesperson, Chris Bishop, says there needs to be more transparency on the rollout timeline.
If you compare New Zealand to Australia, in Australia you can go to a website, punch in your postcode and your details, and you'll find out, basically when you're going to get the vaccine. That's not the situation in New Zealand and hasn't been for quite some time now.
There are also questions around staff at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade will get the vaccine before they head offshore. Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaya Mahuta says she's vigilant about the care of staff being sent overseas. She says those who are already abroad will likely to be covered by the vaccination program in their respective countries.
We're working really hard to ensure that those of our people who are representing us and going overseas, that their situation will be taken into account by the Ministry of Health, and I'm sure there is a small number who will be affected.
The New Zealand Olympic team is also awaiting word on when they will get vaccinated. The New Zealand Olympic Committee says it's working with the government on access to vaccines to protect athletes at the Games in Japan in a few months' time. Mo te hotaka o te ahiahi nei ko Chen Leo tēnei.
Both Dr Bloomfield and the Sports Minister Grant Robertson declined to be interviewed. We also invited New Zealand Cricket on and the Cricket Players Association. Neither of them wanted to talk to us either. In a statement, Dr Bloomfield's boss, Public Service Commissioner Peter Hughes, says the Commission has issued advice on the acceptance of gifts and managing conflicts of interest. Dr Bloomfield is well aware of the rules, has a strong record of full compliance, and has assured me that in this instance he has again complied with the guidance, including declaring the invite from New Zealand Cricket, and I take him at his word. The Prime Minister issued this statement on the matter. The Sports and Recreation Minister attends sporting events on a fairly regular basis. There are currently conversations happening across a range of sectors, including sport, about access to vaccines, and no decisions have been made. It is almost 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. So as the Black Caps seek priority for their players, we went searching for a Citizens 11. That is 11 people who would happily let the team leapfrog them in the COVID vaccine queue. We sent our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Simon Rogers out to see if they could assemble a second 11.
New Zealand cricket is hoping the Black Caps can get priority vaccinations before heading off to play overseas. So we wanted to know whether we could find 11 people here in Auckland's Victoria Park who would be willing to give up their vaccine for the Black Caps.
Absolutely. Devon Conway, he'll get my vaccine. 100%. Go the Black Caps.
No, just because they're cricket players representing New Zealand, no way.
No, because I'm actually classified as an essential worker, so I probably wouldn't know. Not for sporting reasons, no.
It would depend on what sort of kickback I'd get from them in regards to if they actually throw a good sort of bet in the mix for me, I'll be down.
You'd want something back?
I definitely want something back.
Yes, I would.
Why?
Because I think they should support our country to go and play.
So as of now, I'm safe in this country, so our first priority will be the New Zealand players.
Ultimately, it's probably not fair that the general public, I mean, I have family overseas that, I'd like to see as well. So, no.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Who wouldn't want to see the Black Caps playing, right? And so I think ultimately everyone's going to get to a point where vaccinations will be available, but let's prioritise. And I think it's a great prioritisation.
They represent New Zealand, and if they're able to go out there and do something positive in the world in such a time of great, extraordinary shitty energy, then it's a great deal, yeah. I'd do it for them.
Why should I? I'd say I'd give it out to the people that need it first, and you go in line. It's just like anything. Why should they get it?
If they won, absolutely.
So it would be dependent on that. If they're going to go over there and lose, it's like, all right, guys, might have to think about it.
Yeah, they're going to have to confirm that they will win. Then I'll give it to them.
So our second 11 have spoken, and there's dissension in the squad. Some say yes, they would give the Black Caps their vaccine. Some say no way, the Black Caps should not be jumping the queue at all. Time will tell, though, whether our real 11 will get the vaccine before everyone else.
So we are very keen for your feedback on that one. Should the Black Caps and Olympians get vaccinated before the general population? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. As you saw there, Nick and Simon managed to find 6 people to join the Citizens 11 or the second 11 squad, the ones who were prepared to give up their vaccine for the Black Caps. So we have 5 vacant spots in our lineup. Text us on 2101 if you would let them leapfrog you so that they can go off overseas having had the jab. A jab of a different kind from nurses. Their union won't rule out strike action during the mass COVID vaccine rollout if it's unable to reach what it sees as satisfactory pay agreements. The government revealed yesterday that it's bought enough Pfizer jabs for the whole country and is hoping to reach herd immunity levels by the end of the year. 900 vaccinators have been trained to give the Pfizer injection, but the Ministry of Health wants up to 3,000 extra full-time immunisers for the mass vaccine rollout, and most of them are likely to be nurses. Nurses Organisation Industrial Manager Glenda Alexander reckons it will be a big ask to rally that many troops.
There's a real effort being put into finding people with suitable qualifications, and even some of my colleagues who don't work as nurses at the moment have been exploring whether or not they would be able to do some of that work as well in terms of supporting the vaccinator workforce that's going to be required.
So what is the minimum qualification you would require to give someone a COVID vaccine?
Well, I think it's around having, I'm not exactly sure of what they're saying are the prerequisites, but you would expect someone to at least have been working in health or have some kind of prerequisites required to have a standard of education. I guess that would lend itself to being able to do that. But there is full training provided, but I mean they're certainly looking at sourcing applicants or candidates to do this work from non-practicing nurses and doctors or pharmacists. You've got students, medical students, nursing students, pharmacy students, and there are other health professionals who may have had vaccinations within their scope of practice, and that can include, for instance, dentists and physiotherapists. So there's quite a wide range, but you'd expect people to have that kind of minimum, really, qualification to be able to do this work.
Yeah, so those examples that you gave are all in medical fields or related medical fields.
Yeah.
So is it, realistic to expect that anyone giving a vaccination would be some kind of qualified medical professional, or could lay people be trained to do this?
Potentially down the tracks, I think lay people could be trained, and the emphasis is on training and qualifying. So there would be a standard required for people to meet before they would be allowed to do that, which includes not just the technique of giving injections and so forth, but also in terms of making sure they know what to do if there's an adverse reaction or whatever. But also within the workforce that's required, there will be other people there to support the workforce. So there will be a whole range of administration people who will be involved to make sure that the vaccinations are properly documented and recorded. So there's kind of, the twofold kind of approach to person who's giving or administering the vaccination, and then how that's recorded, which would be probably more in the administration field. So that should allow more quickly, for more vaccinations to be given if you've got someone there who's doing the documentation at the same time as the technical skill of administering the vaccination happens.
Right now, how many nurses are cleared to give the COVID vaccine?
I think the most recent number I've heard of number of vaccinators that have been ready to go is around the 800 or 900.
Right. So are nurses ready right now for a mass immunisation program for COVID?
That's a good question. I mean, nurses are flat out, as we talked about earlier, doing their normal work, and so this is work that, this time last year we didn't even have on our agenda. So it is about, just demonstrating again the adaptability of nurses to whatever's sort of thrown at them, really. But are they really ready? I think they have to be ready, because we know this is an important thing that needs to get happening out there, and I'm sure that they will find a way in which they will be able to support our communities by administering these vaccines, but it's not an easy task. Any of this, the whole plans are pretty mammoth when you think about the size of the task ahead of us, really.
Have they ever been in higher demand?
I don't think so. I think they're always in high demand. I mean, we know that how valuable nurses are every day, and we certainly feel that the public has acknowledged that many times. But I think the reality is that there's never been enough of them, never will be, and we don't think they get paid or valued what their worth is. So, or their work of the worth of their work actually, and it's a continuous battle that we have.
Well, seeing as you mentioned the battle around pay and conditions, you've still got contract negotiations underway, don't you? A few sectors that still need to be settled?
Yeah, we have contract negotiations or collective agreements going on right across the health sector, just that a couple of them are probably more notable than others. So we've just at the moment concluded the bargaining around the primary health care MECA, which is the agreement we have with multiple GP practices. So that outcome of those bargainings are out there now being voted on by members, and at the same time our biggest multi-employer collective agreement, MECA, is the district health boards and NZ one, and that's under negotiation.
To that point, Glenda, that there are still negotiations underway and could be for some time, can you guarantee no industrial action, no strikes during the vaccine program rollout?
I can't guarantee anything along those lines because we're not at that point yet. You would have seen last year there were some industrial action taken around supporting the primary healthcare one that I referred to before. This one is at a critical stage. We're very hopeful that there will be a solution that doesn't mean that we have to even contemplate that, because we're as aware as anybody in this country just how situation is in regard to nurses and their value and the value of their work, and we hope that we will find a solution that means we won't have to go down that track, but I can't guarantee you the solution will be found or that won't happen.
So just to be clear, Glenda, you would like it to be resolved without having to go down that avenue, but you're not ruling out using all levers available to you, including industrial action.
That's correct.
The Prime Minister says she's basically expecting around 80% of the population to be immunised by the end of the year, meaning we'll reach some form of herd immunity. Do you think that's realistic?
It could be, yeah. I think given the plans around the rollout of the vaccinations and, the fact that it is a program that's being really fast-tracked, I think there's every likelihood that we'll reach somewhere around that saturation level by the end of the year. But again, that's based on things going according to plan. It's also things not changing in terms of more interruptions by alert level changes. So we're really hopeful that this will help protect those delivering healthcare services and those in the communities that will have infections if that comes to that. So, yeah, it's really important that we get this rollout done, really, to prevent further disruption in the future.
And no disruption from industrial action either, because that would play into whether they can achieve that goal.
That's exactly right.
And that was Nurses Organisation Industrial Services Manager Glenda Alexander. A community cafe on Auckland's busy Karangahape Road may be forced to close if it can't raise $60,000 by the end of the month. For more than a decade, Merge Cafe has been a space where the city's homeless can grab a cup of tea or coffee, a hot meal and have a chat with a peer support worker. But for months it's been running at a loss due largely to the cancellation of key fundraising events on the back of Auckland's repeated COVID-19 lockdowns. So Checkpoint visited the cafe to find out what its closure would mean for those who rely on it. Here's our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe.
Richard Turipa says he's come back to life. Had he not escaped the streets, he might not be sitting here.
Basically, I started to not believe in myself. And when that happens, it's crazy. But, you slowly start to get that belief back inside of you. People start to, bring you out of your shell again. For me, it changed. I could have died out there, like many of our whānau do.
Richard found the going tough when he moved to Auckland more than 10 years ago. He took every part-time job he could, but when some of that work dried up, he had to make decisions many New Zealanders don't think twice about: food or rent. Richard believes living rough was killing him. This time last year, the streets did claim the life of one of his friends.
One of my good friends, someone I would talk to when I was hoha. He'd come and see me when he was a bit hoha, confused or, off track. And we'd just, we'd have a cup of tea, have a feed, and then we'd just talk through what our things were.
Richard's sitting in a Karangahape Road cafe, which he says changed his life. It's called Merge, and if you live in central Auckland, you've probably walked past it more than you realise. Richard now volunteers as a peer support worker here.
Over the years, I had become homeless. This was a place for me to come and have a cup of tea, keep out of the cold, keep warm, and also I've gotten into art and discovered that I can do carving, so we've had exhibitions in here.
The cafe's become a haven for what it calls street whānau, whether they are in need of a hot drink, a feed or just a chat. They can look for a job here, receive mental health support and get help finding a permanent home. Paying customers are welcome too and can buy a pay-it-forward meal. But LifeWise, the organisation which runs Merge, says the cafe is on life support.
We're really struggling financially to make it work at the moment, so what we're hoping is that we're going to get loads of community support and people are going to give us, money, I guess, so we can keep it open.
That's LifeWise Chief Executive Joe Denver. The organisation says it needs to raise $60,000 to keep Merge Cafe open. It's released accounts showing the cafe is running at a $13,000 loss month on month. 4 COVID-19 lockdowns in Auckland have made matters worse. A closed cafe means no pay-it-forward meals for those in need.
Part of that's roadworks and part of it is COVID. And then another big contributing factor for us is we have usually an event called the Big Sleep Out, which we haven't been able to do for the last 2 years. And that usually gives us about $300,000 per year to actually put towards keeping Merge Cafe going.
Checkpoints visiting during a busy lunchtime rush. Spaghetti and meatballs are on the menu. In the kitchen, we run into volunteer Rupert Diath.
This is my first day here. I'm doing it just to give back. I was homeless before lockdown. LifeWise and Merge Cafe, the joint team, got me into the motels during the lockdown, got me into rehab in Whangarei. I've just finished 9 months 2 weeks ago, and I've come back to Auckland. I'm happy, I'm sober, and I'm living well, and this is my opportunity just to say thank you.
Next to him is Timothy Plummer, a volunteer who's clearing tables, doing dishes, cutting spuds and talking to diners.
New Zealand has helped me become the person I am today. I fully appreciate what they've done, and it's a give back, pass on. There's a lot of people that do go without, and this is my way to give back to the community.
Meanwhile, Richard Turipa says he's focused on giving back to those in this cafe that's given him so much.
I'm just trying to get up and lead, or do. I don't always have the answers, but I just do. And then, some of the whānau just see it. Like today, a lot of them were here and they're like, too much, bro. Thank you for your mahi. I'm like, they need to thank me, whānau.
He says Merge Cafe closing down would be devastating for K Road Street whānau and everyone who seeks refuge here.
It'll all go back to the street. The K Road community, they really know that because this place is open, the mission's just down the road, our whānau can get a bit of help during the day. Otherwise, our whānau will be out there. They will be getting cold. They will be getting angry. They will be all sorts of situations happen when these things happen.
LifeWise has given itself until March 31 to raise the $60,000 needed to keep Merge running. With winter around the corner, closure would mean one less place to keep Auckland's homeless out of the cold. For Checkpoint,
Nick Trowbridge.
And if you are listening to that story, please do go and have a look at the video from Nick Trowbridge and Nick Monroe. We'll put it up on our Facebook page. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a terror suspect being deported from Turkey. Well, she'll be pretty much free when she returns to New Zealand. We visit the large-scale vaccination clinic that's just opening in Auckland, and Emirates, Team New Zealand and Luna Ross are inch closer to the starting box. Now, do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
The owners of the largest super yacht planning to visit Auckland for the America's Cup say they've been denied entry because of the size of its crew. The 85-metre-long pleasure craft Bold is anchored at Fiji with more than 20 crew on board. The captain says Immigration New Zealand considers its crew too big of a bubble and it would have to lose too many staff to enter the country. The country's first large-scale COVID-19 vaccination clinic has opened in South Auckland and the vaccination of border workers' families has started. The East Tamaki Clinic will initially vaccinate about 150 people a day and 2 other centres will open soon. Frontline health workers, numbering around 55,000, will be next on the list. Meanwhile, we've heard that the New Zealand Nurses Organisation says it will not rule out strike action during the mass COVID-19 vaccine rollout if it is unable to reach an agreement on satisfactory pay agreements. Nurses Organisation Industrial Manager Glenda Alexander has told Checkpoint it shouldn't come to that. It's been revealed the Director-General of Health was lobbied by cricket bosses for priority access to the COVID vaccine for its Black Caps players while he was attending Sunday's match in Wellington. The team wants players and staff vaccinated before their upcoming overseas tour, but they say the squad will travel regardless. Some players will soon leave for the India Premier League before the Black Caps have 3 tests in England. Ashley Bloomfield says he gave a commitment to New Zealand cricket to look into the issue. Protesters and police today clashed amid efforts to stop the felling of old trees on an Avondale site in Auckland. At least one person's been arrested for trying to stop arborists working on a Canal Road site sold to developers. Former Green Party candidate Steve Abel says the tree felling represents the failure of the Environment Minister, Auckland Council and the developers to find a resolution. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, so some Aussie-based telco has turned down a local listing?
Yeah, the Australian listed fibre company Vocus, they have a New Zealand arm. They've ditched the idea of dual listing on our local stock exchange in favour of a takeover deal from an Australian consortium of businesses. Now, Vocus's New Zealand businesses, they include the likes of Orcon, Slingshot and the recently acquired Stuff Fibre. And it had previously mooted on several occasions the prospect of listing on the NZX with the plans to raise capital to pay down debts and also to continued investment in growing the business. It even went as far to say that there was significant interest in an initial public offering. There was lots of people lining up to put their money into this company, and I'm sure the NZX would have loved to see a company of this size get on its main boards, but those plans have been laid to rest after it signed something called a scheme implementation agreement, which is essentially a deal with a smorgasbord of big Australian firms to purchase the company for about $5.50 a share. Now that values the firm at over 4.5 billion New Zealand dollars, so a sizable company. The deal is still subject to shareholder and regulatory approval, but if it goes ahead, the company says that this consortium, they're very well placed to provide that necessary cash injection to keep the company growing well into the future. So if this deal does get the sign-off, well, it's expected to be completed midway through this year.
Now, this is an interesting story about community housing. A particular project has got a difference. They're looking for extra funders.
Yeah, the investment platform Community Finance, they're looking to raise $100 million to really build affordable homes in this country. Now, they've already committed about $51 million to this project. They're looking to other big institutional investors to step up and help them sort of raise the rest. And among the groups that have already signed up to this pledge called the Aotearoa Pledge are the likes of ANZ, the KiwiSaver providers Generate and Pathfinder, Pathfinder, as well as the investment firm Forsyth Barr, as well as a host of other private foundations. And the pledge really aims to, construct affordable houses, but also provide social rents to people, and also shared equity schemes, which is a clever way of helping people into home ownership. It's really targeted at those people who maybe struggle to piece together a deposit, but actually are in the position to actually service a mortgage. So they're partnered with, and over time, as they make those repayments, the ownership of the property is slowly transferred to them. And it's important to note that the firms that have signed up to this, they're not doing so out of the goodness of their own hearts. There's actually a commercial basis for this investment. There is a chance, there is a belief that this will be profitable, but the real focus here is on delivering those important social outcomes. And this isn't the first time we've seen this with community finance. Last year, they partnered with the Salvation Army to build a similar style project. And the brainchild of community finance, a guy by the name of James Palmer, he's involved with the Christian Savings Scheme. He says investor attitudes, they really do need to change, and he says the likes of the big KiwiSaver funds, they manage big billion-dollar portfolios, that they should really start considering allocating a small sort of portion of that money to local schemes that actually benefit the New Zealand community, rather than just sending that money to big equities or big stocks overseas that really have not much benefit to New Zealanders here.
Interesting. Okay, and you've got scratched down on your piece of paper there some numbers for us.
Yeah, the NZX is closed up 60 points today, about 0.5% to 12,145. The dollar is at 71.2 US cents, 93 Australian. And last time I checked the Reuters screen, Bitcoin was up by about $3,000 on yesterday to about 73,000 New Zealand dollars.
Amazing. Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. Free subject to conditions. That would be the security status of terror suspect Sahara Aden in the community if she returns to New Zealand, according to a senior government minister. It looks increasingly likely the 25-year-old and her 2 children will end up here. They're being held in a deportation centre in Turkey after trying to illegally cross the border from Syria. New Zealanders have been assured national security would be a high priority if Aden is returned to New Zealand. But the government admits there are no laws in place that would allow her to be detained on arrival. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
There are active discussions between New Zealand and Turkish foreign officials about Aden's situation and the practical matters that will soon have to be dealt with. Australia washed its hands of the dual citizen, so the 25-year-old and her 2 young children are now New Zealand's responsibility. The 2 countries have been working through the complexities of her case, but there's no sign Australia will step in to claim the family anytime soon. So what laws are there to deal with New Zealand's first possible case of an ISIS-linked citizen returning home? Police Minister Portal Williams says there are control orders under anti-terror laws available.
I'm confident that we've put in place measures that will enable the public of New Zealand to feel some comfort that we are monitoring this person and her family.
She was asked if the current law means Aden could potentially be at large in the community.
I cannot give you any further details. Actually, this case is still under active consideration. Thank you. But there is not.
Law was rushed through in 2019, creating the control orders, prompted by the prospect of foreign fighters trying to return home. Labour ended up doing a deal with the Greens to get the law through. National wanted a much stricter regime, including the ability to lock up people for 72 hours on arrival. That measure wasn't included in the law as the government didn't end up needing Nationals' votes. The minister at the time, Andrew Little, says the law does allow someone's movements to be restricted.
That is why we have a regime where the police can apply to the court and the judge can look at all the facts and assess all the risks and, if necessary, put appropriate conditions on their movement.
But he confirms even under a control order, Aden would still be free to live in the community.
Free subject to conditions. It is, I think, the right balance in a democracy like ours when you've got somebody who has citizenship who otherwise would have a right to free movement but who is assessed as posing a risk.
Nationals leader Judith Collins says she'll seek further advice as the public needs assurance about security.
New Zealanders expect us to protect New Zealand and New Zealanders first and foremost, and even though she is a New Zealand citizen, people would, I think, expect us to take a very strong stance about this. So I'll get some advice on it, and I also think that it's something that the Prime Minister and I may well want to discuss.
There's no set time frame for a possible return to New Zealand, but there's an expectation the situation should be resolved either way within the next month or so. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It is about 12 minutes to 6 and breaking news, we have managed to form a Citizens 11. The second team, the subs, a whole lot of you would gladly give up your place in the COVID vaccination queue for the Black Caps. So we've made our selection out of all the texts and emails that came in. Davey, aged 75. I'm in the second 11, says Davey. Michael's been in touch. I'm a 72-year-old South Aucklander. I only regret that I have but one vaccine for my cricket team. Terry from Ashburton's got in touch. Hi, Checkpoint. I would forego my vaccine for the Black Caps, even though I'm a paraplegic and CD controller. The Black Caps are representing New Zealand and they deserve to go to the finals. You get place number 3, Terry. Number 4, yes, definitely, says Emma. They are heading into a virus community overseas. We are reasonably safe and need some positives in the world. Scott, number 5 in our selection. I'd definitely let the Black Caps and Olympians ahead of me in the queue. We're talking about maybe several hundred or 1,000 people out of 5 million, a drop in the bucket in a major scale vaccine rollout. And we think out of an abundance of caution, we will also choose a super sub. So number 6 on our list, you've made the cut, Julia. Julia says, yes, I would give my space. So much pleasure and inspiration to many, both older and youngsters. A sense of normality, and if we win pride. I am not a sports follower, but I know it's important to others. And Julia, you're lucky to make the cut because, boy, do we have overwhelming support for people prepared to give up their spaces. But this voice from someone else, someone not offering up their vaccine. Absolutely not, they say. These guys get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. They can wait. First priority are the essential workers and then the COVID hot areas. We'll hopefully get to the rest of your feedback, all the others who were prepared to give up their space in the queue for the cricket team. The Independent Police Conduct Authority and the Privacy Commissioner are broadening their investigation into the police practice of photographing innocent youths to include any member of the public. The inquiry was launched last year after Radio New Zealand alerted police to multiple cases of young Māori being photographed on the street in Wairarapa. This morning, RNZ revealed this has happened to rangatahi across the country and the photographs are being sent to a national police database. Tianiwa Huri-Hanganui reports.
RNZ has spoken to 7 whānau who say their family members, as young as 14, were stopped and photographed by police while they were alone and vulnerable. But it's not just youths this has happened to. A Māori woman, who we're calling Kitty, was driving along Auckland's western motorway with a car full of friends when a police officer pulled her over for speeding. She says she was let off with a warning, but before the officer left, he asked Kitty and her friends to step out of the vehicle.
He asked how old we all were, he asked for a licence, and then he told us to line up, and then he took photos of us, all 3 of us individuals, and then he told us right after the photo that a house was robbed, and it doesn't look like we robbed them though because there was nothing in the car.
She feared there would be consequences if she didn't cooperate.
He didn't ask for permission. He just said, I'm just going to take photos of you. And then we were like, we were just like, we just cooperated it because we knew that if we were already in the shit and he'd probably just arrest us all. So we just let him take our photos.
Police said they couldn't comment on her case as she had not provided a privacy waiver. Kitty and her friends, who were 17 and 18 when the incident occurred 2 years ago, were legally classed as adults. But their experience won't be lost in the joint inquiry by the Privacy Commissioner and the Independent Police Conduct Authority. Its scope has now been widened to include any member of the public who was photographed by police in a public space. The inquiry will look at how police policy is being applied across different districts, the extent to which any restriction ought to govern the photography of children and young people, and the enforcement required if it is found police breached the privacy of the individuals involved. Amnesty International Campaigns Director Lisa Woods strongly suspects the inquiry will uncover breaches of human rights.
Well, this issue is incredibly concerning. It raises serious human rights issues around discrimination and privacy. But I guess fundamentally as a country we should be protecting our children and their ability to feel safe in their daily life without fear of unlawful interference.
Tanya Mead, the director of justice advocacy group Just Speak, says there are serious ethical concerns at play regardless of what the inquiry finds.
Whether the IPCA review finds that these practices are breaching existing regulation or not, the point is, morally, this is not okay. It also has really serious implications for the police in terms of how they're able to do their jobs properly. And I think that they need to proactively make an effort to change that.
The Police Assistant Commissioner for Iwi and Communities, Chris DeWatner, told RNZ this morning police routinely record interactions with people but are required to have the informed consent of young people. He believes officers taking photographs of youths do so with the best intentions and denied they were racially profiling Māori. But Ms Mead, citing research by Just Speak, which found police are nearly twice as likely to take legal action against Māori than Pākehā, says bias in policing is undeniable.
Māori are many times more likely to have those first interactions with police even if they have no prior record, and also to be arrested and charged than Pākehā. All of that context should, I think, give police real pause when engaging in practices like this, which undermine what is already quite a fragile element of a kind of trusting relationship that Māori are expected to have with police officers in their community.
The Police Minister and Children's Commissioner are urging anyone who feel their photograph has been taken inappropriately by police to come forward. The draft inquiry report is expected to be completed by September. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
A former state-approved caregiver accused of sexually abusing boys took the stand today to give evidence at his trial. Earl William Opataia denies 26 charges relating to 6 teens dating back to the early 2000s. His defence lawyers say the claims are fabricated and complainants invented them in the hope of being compensated for being abused in state care. Jean Bell reports from the High Court in Auckland.
Over a 5-year period in the early to mid-2000s, Earl Opitaia ran an Auckland home for child, youth and family. During that time, more than 150 boys ended up in his care. Yesterday, the jury was told that in 2018, Opitaia pleaded guilty to sexually violating a 14-year-old boy in 2014. That prompted a wider police investigation. Defence lawyer Anushka Blom says the allegations in this trial arose while her client was serving jail time for that conviction.
That is why we say that Mr Opataia was low-hanging fruit, ripe for the picking, right for targeting and making a false complaint. He had done wrong. He'd admitted his guilt and he was in prison. What better man to accuse falsely? Who would believe Mr Opataia now?
Giving evidence in his defence, Earl Opitaia recounted his troubled childhood. He said his grandparents were abusive and he spent time living on the streets. But he was an avid boxer and started his own club. He didn't intend to start a home, but troubled youngsters gravitated towards the boxing club.
So I sort of soon realised that, if you've got problems, come to the boxing club. That's pretty much what it was, a magnet to people who had problems. As well as those that wanted to come and actually get right into the training side of things.
He said the boys weren't allowed to come to his flat freely because he was worried what they'd do.
I'm dealing with little thieves in that, if you like. These guys are little criminals, that's what they were. Youth justice, at risk, high risk, youth. I didn't want to be ripped off by them or anything, robbed, if you like.
Earl Opitaia said he never physically disciplined the boys, but he did raise his voice and swear at them to get his message across. He felt he could make a difference to the boys' lives, given his own troubled background.
Give these guys a better chance than what I had, or what they were used to. I'd had feedback from them about other places, and it wasn't always good.
Among the boys in his care was Liam Ashley, a teenager who was murdered in the back of a prison van in 2006. Ula Opitaia got emotional speaking about Mr Ashley and broke down in tears at one point. Opitaia said Mr Ashley's death and the death of his own brother led to a nervous breakdown, and he stopped his caregiving role in late 2006. He admitted to smoking cannabis but denied ever offering the boys drugs. It's the Crown's case that instead of providing a safe and secure environment for the boys in his care, he exploited them for his own sexual gratification. The trial at the High Court at Auckland before a jury of 6 men and 6 women continues. Mō te hotako o te ahi nei, ko Jinbao TNA.
Millions of children in England are back at school for the first time this year. For secondary school students, that means getting a COVID-19 test and wearing masks in class. The BBC's Branwen Jeffries has this report.
OK, early years, welcome back. Come on in. This is a moment of such joy and relief, and that's just the parents. But of course, it's massive for children too. This is the chance to get back to normal.
It is a wrench, and there were a few tears, but for working parents, it's also a reprieve.
I mean, I've got 3 at home, so it's been full on, and a business, but they need to see their friends, they need to learn, they need to actually spend some time apart from each other, because I don't know about yours, but they're sort of driving each other a little bit crazy.
They've terribly missed their friends and their education, so coming back today for them is just amazing.
No, let's get some mud in for the worms, all right? Yeah, let's get some mud.
Straight back into the joy of playing together, the teachers keeping an eye out for the anxious ones.
Shall I put some more on the soil for you?
Kind of, we knew those children might be a little bit wobbly, and already parents knew that, and they were pairing them up with friends to walk through together. So it's going to be so nice to just actually be in front of them and teach and do what we're meant to do, really.
The Year 6 class naming everything they've missed.
Basically, I'm looking forward to doing English, and I just miss my friends.
It was really fun at home, but I've missed playing out in the playground and with my friends.
Sometimes, when you get stuck on work, you don't have someone there that can always help you, but at school, you're sure that somebody's going to be able to give you a hand.
Across England, children returning to classrooms, to Bubbles in Norfolk, in Cornwall and outside Story, while teenagers in Lancashire wore masks in class for the first time.
That report from the BBC. After 6, we will let you know if you made the subs list for the Citizens First 11.
RNZ News at 6 ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The Nurses Organisation will not rule out strike action during the COVID-19 vaccine rollout if it's unable to reach a satisfactory pay agreement. The government has bought enough doses of the Pfizer vaccine for the whole country and is hoping to reach herd immunity levels by the end of the year. 900 vaccinators have been trained to give the doses, but the Ministry of Health wants up to 3,000 extra full-time immunisers, and most of them are expected to be nurses. Organisation spokesperson Glenda Alexander told Checkpoint pay negotiations are ongoing, so strikes are not off the table.
We're very hopeful that there will be a solution that doesn't mean that we have to even contemplate that, because we're as aware as anybody in this country just how the situation is in regard to nurses and their value and the value of their work.
Glenda Alexander from the Nurses Organisation. Meanwhile, families of border workers have started receiving their COVID-19 vaccinations today as the country's first large-scale vaccination clinic opens its doors. The East Tamaki facility in South Auckland will initially vaccinate about 150 people each day, but the Ministry of Health says that will rapidly increase. 2 other vaccination centres in the Auckland region will open in the coming weeks. Following on from the border and MIQ workers' families, frontline health workers are next, numbering around 55,000. The largest super yacht due to visit New Zealand for the America's Cup says it has been denied entry because of its crew size. The 85-metre-long pleasure craft, Bold, is anchored at Fiji with more than 20 crew members on board. The vessel was given approval to travel here under the $50,000 refit rule, but Captain Todd Leach says immigration rules mean it would have to let go of a third of staff to enter the country, which he says is too many. The super yacht will now head to Australia, and he says New Zealand is missing out on $750,000 of booked refit work. Captain Todd Leach. A new group of advising on the COVID-19 response may be able to give recommendations during active outbreaks. The group's tasked with overseeing the continued improvement of the government's pandemic response. Chair Sir Brian Roche, who last year reviewed contact tracing and testing, says there's merit in constantly reviewing the system as a whole. He says there's a desire for real-time advice.
That's appealing because the sooner you can bring ideas forward and have them implemented, then the sooner the improvements are made. So I think, the Minister's right. He's looking for an operating style which is more dynamic than perhaps a hardwired review.
Sir Brian Roche says they expect to deliver their review of the Valentine's Day cluster in 2 to 3 weeks. The government's spending of $1 million a day on transitional and emergency housing is being labelled a disgrace by National. Last quarter, $82.5 million was spent on emergency housing grants, equalling more than $900,000 a day. Another $155,000 each day was spent on motels for transitional housing. National's housing spokesperson, Nicola Willis, says emergency housing has spiralled out of control under Labour's watch. She says thousands of New Zealanders are being squeezed out of the private housing market by escalating prices and a shortage of housing options. A former state-approved caregiver accused of sexually abusing boys has taken the stand at his trial. Earl William Opetaia denies 26 charges relating to 6 teenagers dating back to the early 2000s. His defence lawyers say the claims were fabricated and they've accused the complainants of inventing them to earn compensation for being abused in state care. Earl Opetaia says he didn't intend to start a home, but troubled youngsters gravitated towards his boxing club, and given his own troubled childhood, he thought he could help them. Otago University is reporting an overall increase in student enrolments despite a drop in international student numbers. All 8 universities are expecting fewer foreign students this year due to COVID-related border restrictions. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The University of Otago is starting the year with nearly 1,000 more full-time students than last year because a jump in domestic enrolments has accounted for the loss of 389 international students. It says it's too early to know the financial impact, but it expects to do better this year than its original forecast of a $13 million deficit. The university says its policy of capping foreign enrolments to 15% of total enrolments has helped insulate it from the fall in foreign student numbers. Ko John Gerritsen, TNA.
It's 5 minutes past 6. A health expert doesn't believe there is a problem with sports people getting priority for COVID-19 vaccination. New Zealand Cricket is in discussions with the government about their players getting early vaccinations before they head overseas, while Olympians would need to be vaccinated before the Tokyo Games in July. The government hopes to have the country vaccinated by the end of the year. Professor Peter McIntyre, a medical advisor at the Immunisation Advisory Centre, doesn't have an issue with elite sports people getting their shots early.
We're really talking about small numbers of people. I think there's obviously enthusiasm for them to be able to support the country and to do so in the most straightforward manner. So I can't see that there's a basis for, complaining too loudly about that.
Professor Peter McIntyre. The Black Caps coach Gary Stead fully expects captain Kane Williamson to play in cricket's World Test Championship final. Williamson has been ruled out of the upcoming 3-match one-day series against Bangladesh to rest an elbow injury. February. The Black Caps are set to play the World Test Championship final in June, and Stead is confident the New Zealand skipper will play in the match against India. Chelsea have tightened their grip on fourth place in football's English Premier League after beating Everton 2-0 at Stamford Bridge. Everton dropped a spot to 6th on the table, with West Ham claiming 5th after their 2-0 win over Leeds. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the linguist Dr. Julia de Bress makes her debut as our latest after-dinner speaker, talking about the New Zealand accent. Well, she talks about linguistics, but it's the New Zealand accent she's kicking off with. We find it cringeworthy sometimes, but other people find it sexy. And 4 New Zealand writers discuss the role adventure has played in their creative lives. Did they see the crescent or the whole of the moon? On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow night south of Auckland. Gisborne to Wairarapa mainly fine. Isolated showers in Gisborne tonight. Scattered rain in Wairarapa tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington fine tonight. Mostly cloudy tomorrow. Isolated showers turning to rain for a time. Marlborough and Nelson a period of rain tomorrow. Otherwise fine. Bulla to Fiordland. Isolated showers turning to rain south of the glaciers tonight, spreading north tomorrow with heavy falls. Easing to isolated showers from afternoon and clearing in Fiordland, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloud increasing with patchy rain for Southland and Otago tonight. Rain becoming widespread tomorrow morning, then easing to a few showers about Southland and Otago by tomorrow afternoon. Chatham Islands, occasional showers. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tako ingoa. The government plans to release the vaccine priority list tomorrow, detailing who will get their jab and when, based on the arrival of more vaccines into the country. Today, the country's first large-scale vaccination clinic has been opened in Auckland, and our health correspondent, Rowan Quinn, is there and joins me now. Rowan, what's the deal with this clinic?
Hi Lisa, well I guess this is really the first peep of what it's going to look like for most of us when we get our vaccines. It's sort of a big office space that's been cleared out of all its furniture and replaced with vaccine furniture and paraphernalia. There's sort of roped off sections, a bit like an airport check-in, with arrows on the floor to direct you to different areas. So when you come in, you'd be directed to a little desk where you'd have a health check, your temperature, some questions, you give your consent to the vaccine, and then you're sort of funneled through to these little booths that are set up to give you some privacy when you get the vaccine. They're sort of, I guess, roughly the height of a person, with some very striking lavender and white diagonal stripes. So you'd have your vaccine in there, and then you funnel through to a big waiting area where you'd wait for about 30 minutes, and there's some health staff there keeping an eye on you and checking that you're okay after you've had the vaccine. So here in Auckland, there's quite a lot of stickers warning about social distancing. But when this is rolled out to other centres, there won't be as much of that, because Auckland it's at level 2 at the moment, obviously, and has been at higher risk in these COVID outbreaks.
And Rowan, just to be clear, is that all they will do at this clinic is COVID vaccinations?
That's right, that's all it is. And like I said, there's a bit of a process. You'll have all your health checks, so I guess there is a possibility that you may be turned away from your vaccination. The other thing that will happen is after you've had your vaccine, you will go and put your details into the new COVID register that's been set up especially for COVID vaccinations, which is different to the National Immunisation Register, which has caused problems in the past. So there's now a specific one to make sure that the government's trying to keep track of everyone that gets vaccinated, because of course it wants to reach most of us.
So how many people went through there today?
We had 136 through today. At the moment, this is just for, as you said, the households, families of border workers. So they want to get through about 50,000, so a few more to go yet. We heard from Joe Bourne, who is a Te Puke GP, but he's been seconded to lead the vaccination program for the Ministry of Health. He said that there were no major adverse reactions today, that everyone came through the vaccine feeling really well. And he said that he's been really interested talking to people and hearing what their reasons for getting the vaccine are.
It's been fascinating today to see some of the responses of people that have been vaccinated and see how grateful they are to be able to offer this extra level of protection to their whānau. And what I've been seeing again and again is that is a key motivating factor for people to come in and get vaccinated, not necessarily thinking about their own protection, but acknowledging the higher risk environment in which they're working and how they can protect their mokopuna, their kaumātua within their communities. So that's been really amazing to see how people are actually seeing this as a community responsibility to be vaccinated, not just based on their own protection.
So that's Dr. Joe Bourne. And Rowan, we're expecting this further announcement from the government tomorrow. What are we anticipating it's going to include?
Well, as you said in the intro there, it's the COVID Minister, Chris Hipkins, is going to give a few more details of the priorities. Now, they have sort of managed expectations a little bit in terms of what they'll tell us about what's next for the rollout, saying it's a rough guide. So they want to look at sort of the vulnerability and the need rather than giving us set dates for regions. And so they're saying that it's who they consider the next priority, and we know that there have been a lot of groups who have been saying that they would like to be next. There have been calls for Māori to be next, there's been calls for the elderly, for rest home residents, for truck drivers, for sports teams, but one of the big ones has been, of course, for South Auckland, because it's had 2 outbreaks now. It has MIQ facilities here, about 6. It has the border workers, a lot of border workers here at the airport, and so a lot of community leaders say that they want the government to do more than put it first when it comes to community vaccinations. They want to put it up a little bit of a higher priority. So it's going to be interesting to see whether Chris Hipkins makes any signals towards that tomorrow.
Thanks, Rowan. That's our health correspondent, Rowan Quinn, who is out at this first large-scale vaccination clinic to be opened, and that one is in Auckland. An independent advisory group has been set up to oversee what the government's calling the continual improvement of its COVID-19 response. Chaired by Sir Brian Roche, the group is tasked with independently reviewing and providing advice on the public health response, the border and MIQ. The COVID-19 response minister says the group will report regularly and replace the previous ad hoc approach to reviews and inquiries. National says this is a very positive but also an overdue step. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Chris Hipkins says the government has relied on independent advice throughout the pandemic, but this formalises that approach and ensures monitoring is done regularly and advice can be drawn on quickly.
Rather than a more formal kind of inquiry type mechanism where they take months and months to do, we can't really afford to take that amount of time, so we want something that's going to report regularly, and it might be they report progressively, so they report it bits at a time.
He says he has a few immediate priorities for the group, including a review of the recent Valentine's Day cluster.
I imagine there will undoubtedly be things that can be improved for next time. Like I said, I've already sort of foreshadowed some of the things I want them to look at, like whether having 4 different categories of contacts was helpful or a hindrance.
The group's chair, Sir Brian Roche, who last year reviewed the government's contact tracing and testing systems, says they will be constantly reviewing the system as a whole.
The individual parts are important, but the system perspective is critical because each element becomes interdependent. So I think it has considerable merit to think it from a systems perspective, just from an individual process.
Sir Brian says he expects this setup will mean recommendations can be made much faster, perhaps even while an outbreak is still active.
There's this desire from an operating perspective that the advice and perspective is more real time. And so, that's appealing because the sooner you can bring ideas forward and have them implemented, then the sooner the improvements are made.
National leader Judith Collins says she's really pleased for the country this group is being set up. But she says it's well overdue.
Professor Nick Baker and a couple of other people had been suggesting that at least back in August. I think it could have been done before, but I think we should give credit where it's due, and we've finally got this, and that's excellent.
National's COVID-19 response spokesperson Chris Bishop says the latest outbreak has highlighted the need for this even more.
This most recent cluster as well, there's some real serious questions. So it feels a little bit like a response to the most recent events, but also a bit of a catch-all for the generic government response, and that's a positive thing.
But Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern rejects the suggestion this is a response to any blunders made in the handling of the recent outbreak.
Well, of course, I would reject that premise, but it has been part of our discussions for some time, and the Minister's now confirmed the membership. So no, it's not a direct result.
Mr Bishop says National will be ensuring the government keeps its word that the group's reports will be released regularly and publicly.
We'll certainly be holding them to account on that. You can rest assured of that. I mean, these reports are a good thing, but they're only good if they're in the public domain.
Sir Brian Roche says the group hopes to report back on the lessons learned from the Valentine's Day cluster and any changes needed in the next 2 to 3 weeks. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
Now, an update on an earlier story. I spoke to the nurses organisation earlier in the program. It's not ruling out using all levers available to it in its pay negotiation, and that includes striking during the COVID mass vaccination rollout. So it's not ruling that out, not taking it off the table. The Health Minister, Andrew Little's got in touch to say, I continue to be briefed by the Ministry of Health about the progress of negotiations. I am satisfied from what I've heard that the parties are focused on a constructive outcome. It is almost 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Emirates Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa are set to enter the starting box tomorrow, getting the America's Cup officially underway. Fans are looking forward to it. Teams are being guarded in public and organisers are just hopeful the majority of racing will be able to take place under Level 1. Adam Jacobson has the details.
The first team to win 7 races will take home the old mug, but neither defender Team New Zealand or challenger Luna Rossa gave much away in a pre-race press conference this morning. The New Zealand skipper, Peter Burling, was guarded on the topic of pre-starts, saying he didn't want to reveal all of his team's tactics.
What you can expect from us tomorrow, you probably have to wait and see. We don't want to give them too many tips.
However, he did acknowledge it's going to be a really tight yacht race.
Until we get to that first race where we actually get to line up and come off the start line together, and that'll be the first time I think both teams will really have a good feel for how that speed's going. But in saying that, that'll only be for one wind strength, one condition, and it looks like a pretty dynamic period in terms of weather, so I think that makes it all the more exciting.
Luna Rossa skipper and team director Max Serena says there's a lot of pressure on both teams. He adds the Kiwis are going to be hard to beat, but that's going to make for exciting sailing.
We know they're fast because we sailed against them more than 2 months ago, and we saw them sailing during few practice a few weeks ago against the American and the English. But I don't know. I think it's too early for me. I don't have the crystal ball.
Meanwhile, the Tamaki Makaurau business community is gearing up for what it hopes will be a busy period, following the slump caused by Level 3 restrictions. Auckland Unlimited General Manager Steve Armitage says there have been more than 3,000 orders for buntings, posters and displays.
Which I think is a pretty good indication that businesses do want to find positives in the particularly challenging year that we've had, and the America's Cup provides a really good outlet for that.
He says the summer would have been a particularly hard one for the business community without the Cup.
In some respects, we're hoping that we've banked a whole lot of goodwill with a lot of people who'd be predisposed to a visit to Auckland and New Zealand in the future now, and that will be something that our business community can capitalise on.
While no buntings were on display at the official Team New Zealand bar, next door at the Conservatory, Director Tricky Hartley says he's ready for the punters to arrive.
Down here on the waterfront, we are very reliant on the tourists. However, you've got to look at it for what it is. We're out of it now. We're expecting a good time ahead. So hopefully now this is going to be the thing we've all been waiting for.
And despite the COVID delays, fans are keen to see some racing.
I work here, so I have the benefit of after work being able to watch the sailing. So I'm already here, so COVID hasn't put me off.
No, it won't put me off. I'll be out there.
I'm interested to see how Italy go. Be interested to see if they can keep up with New Zealand.
That's winning it, of course. Good close racing, good sportsmanship, and a fair fight, and hopefully we win.
And we'll get the first inklings of that after 4:15 tomorrow afternoon, when the first 2 races get underway. Mō te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, ko Adam Jacobson tēnei.
COVID lockdowns in the world's largest Polynesian city forced the Auckland Arts Festival to reschedule much of a year's work in the space of a week. But a delayed launch is set for Thursday, and the city's Pacific heritage is obvious in this year's offering, with the arts community set to dance, sing, paint, vogue and tread the boards of Auckland. Dominic Godfrey spoke with some taking part.
The iconic Mount Roskill State House, pivotal to Toa Fraser's film number 2, is getting an encore as an outdoor theatre for works directed by Pacific Underground's Tania Soliali'i Moangotutia. Readings from Oscar Kitely's Dawn Raids feature, honouring the Polynesian Panthers' 50th anniversary and the many Pacific families uprooted during the era. There's also a focus on ongoing displacement. Ms Moangotutia says the Roskill development's gentrification of the area promises 10,000 new houses, but means the loss of many homes and histories, like the location for number 2, which is set for demolition.
Toa Fraser had actually been through the neighbourhood and had tweeted about how sad he was because the neighbourhood was changing, and he put a picture of the house up on his tweet, and he was just saying, 16 years ago we shot this film and now it's sad to see this neighbourhood changing.
The festival's given a brief reprieve from the wrecking ball. Local theatre makers will showcase their stories of Mount Roskill and its redevelopment.
So we reached out to the high school, because that's where my kids went, to the performing arts teacher there, Emma Gillies, and she connected us with all these potential participants that would be interested. So between my kids and her students and, my kids' mates, we were able to get a group of people.
Yonatana Kaulilupo, or John, says the play's about bringing life to homes that are no longer standing by telling the stories of the families who used to live there.
We're not only communicating personal stories to us, but also communicating stories that mean something to our community, to Roskill residents, to the residents who lived in those state houses for like 30 plus years. And we're using theatre to bring that to life, like a last little hurrah for our hood, basically.
And the event will have a family feel.
Expect like you're coming to a massive ass family kuanga'i on a Sunday. Like, it's real chill, it's in the backyard. We want people to be as chill and kind of feel like they're part of the story. They're watching their family members arguing, trauma, laughing. Like, we want them to feel like they are part of that.
Another event marking the Polynesian Panthers' 50th anniversary is the installation of a street mural depicting some of the social justice issues they've brought to light. Panther statesman Tingilau Ness says the display tells a story of struggle.
Whakaako kia whakaora is educate to liberate, and if we can do that through art, it's better than thumping people on the head and getting people to change their minds and attitudes, about racism and exploitation and things like that. So we have a story to tell.
Tingilau Ness says the US Black Panther artist and mentor Emery Douglas inspired their collaboration with Huriana Kopeke Te Aho, Numa Mackenzie and Tuasieke Taihia. They also worked with Chris McBride, who Tingi describes as a Pacific Irelander.
Some of the key components that are depicted also in the mural are the importance of education. So there's young people. We also touch on ihu mātau, and we touch on COVID. We touch on climate change.
Also turning up the heat is the Siva Afi Festival, bringing together exponents of the Samoan fire knife dance tradition. Organiser Amo Yeriko says the Auckland Festival's a great opportunity to take the art to a wider audience.
It's something that is of Pacific tradition, but it's also very exciting because it has changed over time. It's modernised to suit the times, and so the interest is now cross-cultural.
The South Auckland event brings together a women's competition for the first time with Wahine Toa Awhi this Friday and schools competing on the Saturday. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahine, ko Dominic Godfrey tēnei.
And you can find details of when those events are happening on our website. We've had some feedback in relation to the Nurses Organisation interview. This is the organisation not ruling out strike action during the mass COVID vaccine rollout if they don't get it what they consider a decent deal in pay negotiations. Chris has got in touch to say there is a lot of empty and insincere rhetoric about how much nurses are valued. Last negotiating round, they were absolutely shafted when compared to how the teachers were treated. This round, they have been offered a 1% rise. They would be totally justified ruthlessly holding the country to ransom over the vaccinations. Squeaky and screechy, the humble recorder's arguably one of the most hated instruments, but it's now getting an image makeover. The Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra has created a free online resource that allows people to play with some of Australia's best musicians. The ABC's Selena Ross reports.
From this to this. The Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra wants everyone to be able to harness the beauty of the much maligned recorder.
We'd like to portray the recorder in a more artistic light.
The TSO has created an online resource for beginners, whether they're children in class or adults in their lounge room. Recorder Liftoff has 30 original works to take new musicians from simple one-note pieces through to more complex compositions.
We created 3 videos for each piece that take people through from starting out where they can learn their fingering right through to being brave enough to play with an ensemble all on their own.
University of Tasmania music students composed the pieces. Liam McGuinness thinks the bad rap given to beginner players is unhelpful.
If we're giving it to children who are interested in playing and then we tell them it's horrific, we're not really suggesting them to keep playing.
Schools have jumped on the resource.
What's the term we're using? Rhythm, good girl.
Primary school music teacher Andrea Marks has seen the confidence grow among her students as they play alongside the professionals.
And one of them looked at me and said, "Was that us? Did we just get to play with them?" And I went, "Absolutely," and their eyes just lit up, and that's what I love.
Well, it's really fun and it inspires me because I really like learning new things.
The free resources are available anywhere in the world. As beginners get started, Liam McGuinness has a tip for any suffering parents.
Be open, because in a few years it might be really nice.
So get your recorder out and give it a crack. That report was from the ABC's Selena Ross. Now, a couple of things before we go. If you were listening on radio tonight, you may have noticed we had a few audio problems with one particular story. Thank you so much for letting us know. We've got our tech team onto it. They're going to sort the issue. But we will put Amy Williams' story, now that was the one about the super yacht with the crew denied entry to New Zealand, up on our website so you can click into it and hear all the audio and interviews in that. Now, the other thing, the subs on the second 11 Citizens cricket team. These are the people who've made our subs list who texted in and said that they would give up their place in the COVID vaccine queue for the Black Caps. Lewis, or Louis, has said, "I feel the Black Caps should have priority over the general population. I don't follow cricket, but that doesn't matter because I see them as representing Aotearoa on the international stage. Surely that's a good thing. It's unlikely I would receive the vaccine much later, given the vaccine is arriving here in large shipments." Gail would give up her spot. "I'm 69, says Gail. I would absolutely want the Black Caps vaccinated before they go overseas. They're representing New Zealand and give many of us a lot of pleasure. They're welcome to get the vaccine before I do. They wouldn't be going overseas if they weren't representing New Zealand. Anyone going overseas representing New Zealand would get my support. Thanks, Gail." And a farmer's got in touch to say, "I'm a farmer and can work from home. I'm happy to give up my place in the vaccination queue to the Black Caps, along with anyone else who needs to travel for work overseas." So would Josephine, and so would Ben, and so would a whole lot of others among you. Except for this person, the Black Caps under no circumstances should jump the queue for the vaccine. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The nurses' organisation will not rule out strike action during the COVID-19 vaccine rollout if it's unable to reach satisfactory pay agreements. Families of border workers have already started receiving their jabs today, with the opening of the country's first large-scale vaccination clinic in Auckland. The owners of the largest super yacht planning to visit Auckland for the America's Cup say they've been denied entry because of the size of its crew. President Biden's 2 German shepherds are being returned to the family home in Delaware after reportedly biting a member of the White House security. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Looks like it prevents transmission as well, which is really important. And we're not seeing any surprises.